So I'm going to start. So hello and welcome. If you don't know me, my name's Rachel. My website is thehealthyroom.com. I'm a natural family planning teacher, and I also do fertility massage and nutrition, specializing in women's pelvic health and hormones. So I read a lot of science based evidence-based studies, and every time I read more and more, I find more and more things are affected by our hormones and the cycle. And I thought, as well as just going over the basics of the cycle, it's really fascinating to look at what happens to our bodies depending on what the hormones are doing as well. So I'm going to be including that. So I'm just going to hop onto my slides. Just give me 1 minute. So if you could confirm that you can see my screen, that would be fantastic. Can you see a purple slide? It should say Know Your Flow with Rachel Eyre from The Healthy Womb. If someone could just let me know that they could see that, and then I know that you can see it. So I can see people saying no technical aspects. Wonderful. Someone can see them. That's great. Okay, so what we're going to cover today, I am going to go over the menstrual cycle in a little bit of detail just to make sure that you're familiar with the 4 stages. And I'm going to highlight the hormones that happen at that stage, at each different stage in the cycle, because it's mostly the hormones that have the biggest biochemical effect on the body, but it's amazing what they do affect. So there are 4 stages of the cycle. We start off with the menstrual phase, which may seem a bit counterintuitive because you think that's at the end of the cycle. But the reason why I start with that is because when you chart your cycle, you always start off with that being cycle day 1, or calendar day 1 is the first day of your menstrual flow, because it's the easiest thing to spot in the whole cycle to start with. So we're going to look at the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle, and then I'm going to go over various different aspects of your health, your well-being, your life. So I've called it food, mood, and libido because they were the 3 key things that you will get out of this, but there are so many other softer and less obvious aspects that it can affect. So 4 phases. We start off in menstruation, and hopefully you're all familiar with this one. So it's a flowing bleed following a drop in estrogen and progesterone after an ovulation. So this is the point of your cycle where your hormones drop down to nothing. And as a result, you won't have any of the benefits of those hormones, such as the added energy or anything else that they have. We'll cover that a bit later on. Your next phase is called the follicular phase or the proliferative phase. So it's got these 2 names, and the reason why is because you start off calling it the follicular phase because your follicles are developing and they produce estrogen, and the estrogen causes the womb lining to proliferate. So I tend to call it the follicular phase. And if you're interested in the type of estrogen, it's estradiol. And I'm spelling this the English way, not the American way. So I have OE for my estrogen. So the follicular phase, we have the follicles growing and they produce estrogen in greater and greater and greater quantities. This is the stage in which we start to become fertile. We start to have cervical fluid or cervical mucus. The cervix will soften and rise up. And this is the point in our biology in which we are primed to be attractive to mates, or we are primed to attract a mate. A few people get a bit funny when I talk about this kind of biology because they think I'm saying that we're ruled by our hormones, but actually the whole point of this is to work out how we can make the most out of the hormones in our cycle. So we've got the follicular stroke proliferative phase. This rise in estrogen causes us to feel a bit more juicier, so we have more lubrication in our joints. We have more cervical lubrication, we produce cervical fluid, we become more sociable, our energy levels rise, we become more better at communication, our libido will increase, and this is all to aid the likelihood of us having intercourse and having sperm in place ready for ovulation, which is the next phase. So the next phase is ovulation. This is where your estrogen reaches a peak because one of your follicles has hopefully matured enough to send the sign saying, I'm here, I'm ready. This triggers a surge in luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which causes the follicle to burst and rupture, hopefully to be received by a fallopian tube. And that's where it'll be fertilized if there's any sperm waiting for it. So at this stage, your body hits sort of peak libido. You're at your most attractive and you're at your most communicative. So we're going to cover how you can utilize that to the best of your ability later on. Following that, you enter your luteal phase. So at this point, your body doesn't know if it's pregnant or not. So it goes into protective mode. So at this point, it's going to try and protect you, overanalyze everything. You'll get a slight drop in estrogen and then it sort of climbs back up again in the second week of the luteal phase. It's about 2 weeks long. And at this stage, progesterone is your dominant hormone throughout, and that holds the womb lining in place. And then at the end of the luteal phase, both the progesterone and the estrogen drop off, and then you'll have a bleed again, assuming you're not pregnant. So that's the basics. Does anyone have any questions on the basic hormones there? I'll just give you a few minutes. Melanie, I know you disconnected and then reconnected. Is everyone else okay? I'm going to give you a few minutes just in case anyone has any questions on the hormones. And the key ones are to remember that you've got estrogen and progesterone. Okay, there's no questions. I'm going to carry on, but feel free to type questions. I can sort of see them pop up on the screen. Okay, so how it affects us. Surprisingly, our hormones affect us way more than we realize. So our brain chemistry changes, our creativity changes, our energy level changes, how we can organize ourselves, how we express ourselves, even what we look like. Our face actually changes shape throughout our cycles. How we can read other people, how we have energy to do things, how we socialize with people, all these things change throughout the month. It's actually really quite surprising how much does change. So I'm going to start off with food because this one surprises a lot of people the most. Substrate of preference sounds really sciencey. So this is really what your body uses in its for energy first. So substrate is glucose, fat, and protein. So sugar, fat, and protein. And this is really fascinating. So our body actually changes what it does throughout the cycle. So first of all, if there's any glucose or sugar available, your cells will always try and metabolize that first. When they run out, this is where it gets really exciting. The first half of your cycle, so from menstruation right up to ovulation, when it runs out of glucose, your body then goes on to burn fat. However, after you've ovulated, after it runs out of glucose, your body then goes on to burn protein. And if there's no protein available in your body, then it will start breaking down muscles. So that's number one when it comes to food, and that always surprises me. Obviously, if people aren't ovulating or they're on the pill, this will not have the same effect. But it always amazes me that when people talk about burning fat and burning protein, that they don't look at it from the point of what happens at different points in your cycle. The other thing to bear in mind is insulin sensitivity. So we know when women get pregnant that they become more at risk of diabetes, and they have to have checks for gestational diabetes. And this has become because they become more insulin resistant throughout the pregnancy, and this is due to progesterone. Estrogen, which is the hormone that we get at the first half of the cycle on its own, is very good for improving insulin sensitivity. So if you've got regular ovulation happening, you've got the regular insulin sensitivity and then the insulin resistant pattern going on. So a lot of people know, or I will tell them, that you can get away with eating a lot more in the first half of your cycle. And this is because the estrogen in the first half of your cycle can counteract if you're eating too many treats to a certain degree. And then after ovulation, your body just doesn't have the same tolerance. And further note of interest, if you have any kind of food issues, so you think you may have an intolerance to, say, for example, gluten or soy or dairy, you can generally get away with sneaking them in the first half of your cycle, but you're more likely to have a reaction in the second half of your cycle. And that always fascinates me. And you can see that happen on people's charts as well. So if you're charting your cycle, you sometimes see temperature rises in funny places when someone eats something that they're not sure if they're allergic to, because the inflammation in their body goes up. And also cervical fluid can increase as well if someone eats something that promotes inflammation in their body. So it's really fascinating to see how that shows in the cycle. So mood, this one is pretty fascinating. So your energy levels, you probably have worked out, I'm guessing most of you feel down and quite tired on day 1 of your bleed, day 1 to 3 usually. You feel quite tired, quite exhausted. That's because you have no hormone levels, or you have some, they're just really, really low. So you haven't got the estrogen giving you energy, you haven't got the progesterone to sort of keep you going. So you expect to feel pretty down at that point in the cycle. Once you start producing estrogen in qualitative amounts, so amounts that you can measure, your energy levels start going up. And around ovulation, this peaks, and then in the luteal phase, it sort of gradually stays steady and calm. But one of the interesting things is, because your body is obviously trying to find a mate in the first half of your cycle, you become more sociable. You have more energy for going out with your friends. You have more energy for going out on dates. You have more energy to do things. So this is the point in your cycle where you can really start pushing it, whether it's at work, in your social life, if it's in the gym. The first half of your cycle is where you can start really pushing that to the limit, right up to ovulation. And then afterwards, things start tailing off. And then when you hit your period, obviously, you kind of feel quite tired and you just want to do as little as possible. I've put introversion versus extroversion, and not many people seem to know what this means. So introversion, this means you get your energy from being on your own. So if you're feeling a bit down or whatever, you feel more energized when you spend time on yourself. It feels more nurturing and healing to you. Extroversion is when you get your energy from being around other people. So after you've finished your period, you start feeling more sociable, you become more extrovert because you want to go out and meet people, and you get your energy from being around other people. After ovulation, you withdraw a bit more and you feel better and more nurtured and nourished being on your own. And on your period, you tend to just want to be in your own little cave. And that's sort of the true introversion. You just feel better being by yourself. The empathy side of things. So when you are feeling more sociable and ready to get out and about, you become better at communicating with people because subconsciously your body wants you to connect with as many people as possible. So you're better at empathizing with people, and you're better at expressing yourself to them, and you're better at understanding what they're trying to say to you. After you've ovulated, this tends to flip the other way and you become very analytical, and this is where you can perhaps overanalyze things, and Usually, most people have a lot of intuition in this phase of their cycle, so they're good at reading situations and they're good at making good decisions with less information available. That's the definition of intuition. But some people, if you have a hormonal imbalance, this may go a bit too far and you can end up over sorry, I've got a few people saying the connection's dropping, and I'm not sure why, because I'm wired into the Ethernet. So all I can say is if you just hit the reconnect link, and you will get a replay. Sorry, so just going to the empathy side. Once you go into your luteal phase, that stage after ovulation, your empathy sort of drops. You're unable to sort of empathize with people, but you're very good at analyzing things. And if your hormones aren't quite as balanced, you may find that you overanalyze things and perhaps play them through too far in your head. And finally, with mood, your risk appetite will change. So after you've had your period, you will start gaining more and more confidence. And if, for example, you're in a performance role, this is the stage where you can push your performance more and more. And around ovulation, you have more sort of guts and more energy to do things that you wouldn't normally do. So, for example, if you're a gymnast, that's when you would do the absolute most trickiest routine that you can only pull off on a good day. You would go for it then. After you've ovulated, you would then be more risk averse. So you look at safety and how you can protect yourself. So all these different things can sort of plug into your mood. And really interestingly, I can't find the data behind this, but Christian Northrup, she talks about greater connection between the two hemispheres of your brain during the luteal phase. So that's more talk between the two sides of your brain, which means that you're better at reading different situations and you're better at looking at things as a whole. So moving on to the next slide. Ooh. I'm really sorry, guys. A few of you have said about the connection dropping. I'm not sure why, because I'm wired into the Ethernet. But you will definitely get the replay afterwards. So if anything's missing, you should hopefully catch that then. So libido. Most people will have absolutely no libido at all during their bleed. And again, that's because your estrogen level has dropped off. As your estrogen level rises, your libido will rise, because obviously your body is going to try and want you to become pregnant at this stage. And in NFP, there's something called, sorry, that's natural family planning. There's something called the baby effect. And that is women are more likely to take risks with their sexual health, and they're more likely to risk becoming pregnant because they have more urges around this time in their cycle. So one thing to bear in mind, it's also the time in your cycle during the proliferative phase to ovulation where your libido is at its highest, but it's also the time where you're more likely to want to try different things that you haven't tried before. And this may be things that won't get you pregnant. So it's worth having a think about what it is that you may or may not want to try during this phase and how you can be creative if you want to avoid using barrier methods or anything else, but you still want to be active during that time. After you've ovulated, that's when your libido peak starts declining. Now, some women will still have some libido during the cycle, especially when the estrogen sort of picks up in that second week. Other women will find that they just don't want to be touched at all. And it's really important to work out how your body responds at different phases in the cycle. And once you start getting used to this, and this is why I highly recommend charting for so many different reasons. You can communicate this to your partner so they know what you like, and it may be that during your luteal phase you want more hugging and more touching, and especially during your period, some women don't want to be touched at all. Other women want more prolonged loving touch. And actually, when you start journaling this, you can communicate this to your partner, and it can be a lot more beneficial than just sort of they're up for it, you're not, and they don't really understand why. We're going to cover charting in a bit more detail in a minute. So, moving on. My slides seem to have oops, just frozen. 1 second, guys. Technical issue. I'm not sure what's happening here with Keynote. Oh, here we go. It's working again. Okay, how are we going with the connections? I haven't had anyone else say anything about connections. Okay. So the next thing is exercise. So this changes throughout your cycle. One, if you're looking at exercising for various different health reasons, if you bear in mind what I said before about the substrate of preference, so whether you're burning fat or whether you're burning muscle, this can have some bearing on what kind of exercise you want to do. And it's worth speaking to a personal trainer if you're really looking at developing muscle or burning fat. But you can start thinking about how you can work your exercise around your cycle. So in your follicular phase, you want to socialize more. So this is a really good time to go and try an exercise class. So a lot of people don't want to go and try Zumba, for example, for the first time. They don't know anyone. They're a bit embarrassed. But actually, during your proliferative phase or your follicular phase, through to ovulation, this is the ideal time to do that, because you're going to want to meet more people and you're going to want to have more fun in a group. After you've ovulated, you're more likely to want to be on your own and to not bother with other people. So this is when you'll start thinking about doing your own thing. So whether it's just going to the gym on the treadmill, or whether you want to go for a swim or a run or a walk, this is when you're more likely to want to do things on your own. Now, I've hinted at this before, when to push yourself. So when you've got more estrogen, so again, that first half of your cycle, you're going to want to build up your routine then. If you want to increase your fitness or you want to increase your fat burning, this is the stage in which you do that. So you try and push through more up to and including ovulation. And then after ovulation, that's when you try and maintain that new level, because quite frankly, your energy levels will have dropped a bit and you won't have that push as much. So when you're trying to improve your fitness or your flexibility or your muscle strength, that first half of your cycle is when you really want to push and get that new amount. And then after that, that's when you want to just try and maintain that new level. One thing I will say is during your bleed, you're going to want to retreat from all these kind of exercises and just start looking at more nurturing and nourishing exercises such as stretching, really slow yoga nidra, which is the yoga sleep, really slow Pilates. The more slower nurturing exercises, or going for a gentle walk. So the rest of your cycle, you're going to want to be active, but definitely during your bleed, you want to be looking at slow things and things that make you feel nourished and enhance relaxation. And finally, if you're into team sports or anything that requires a bit of analysis, your intuition, as I said, it's stronger after ovulation. It's stronger in your luteal phase. So if you want to know the best time to sort of read your opponents, or if you're in a team game trying to work out what the other team are doing, you're naturally going to be better at this in your luteal phase, because that's when you've got that increased connection in the hemispheres in your brain, and your analytical skills are going to be at their highest. So how can you start to include this into your routine? So the first thing I always say to people is start charting your cycle. There are several different ways you can do this. So if you've signed up to my mailing list, you will have had the basic cycle charting sent out to you, where it talks you through how to chart whether you're bleeding, whether you've got any cervical fluid, the moon position, just to give you some reference if you don't have a regular bleed, but also to start journaling and noting how you feel on each day. And this is really important to start because you want to see where your creative peaks and troughs are, when you make better decisions in the month, when you have the most energy, when you're the most communicative in a good way, when you're the most intuitive, when you're better at analysis, because all these things can be used to really enhance your work, your home life, your friendship. You can really maximize all the opportunities you have. So one of the things that I see a lot of women do when they're nearing ovulation, they have so much energy. They start packing their diary full because they honestly feel on top of the world, that they can do anything and they can do whatever and not feel tired. But the problem is they book that in when they're feeling like that. And usually they book that in for the next week or the week after. So they're then in their luteal phase when their energy has dropped, or even during their bleed 2 weeks later. So they've booked all this in thinking, I've got all the energy to do this. And then when it comes to that stage, they're feeling absolutely knackered, but their days are booked to the max. So if you start charting your cycle, you can start seeing when you have the energy peaks and troughs. When you know that you're going to have to make a big decision and you need to really have your sort of good analytical cap on to be able to understand things, or you need to look at numbers or finances or legal things, this tends to happen better in your luteal phase, when you're more intuitive, when you make better decisions. So if you know you've got something coming up, you can try and book it in when you know that you're going to be in your luteal phase, so that you've got the time to make a decision when your brain is wired that way. In terms of your communication, in the later half of your follicular phase, leading up to ovulation, this is when you're going to be at your most persuasive and your most irresistible. So if you need to convince someone to do something, such as give you a pay rise, or you need to persuade someone to help you out with something, this is the best time to do it. So if you can try and time it for that phase of your cycle, you're going to be almost irresistible, because you're going to be able to naturally communicate this better. If you need time to reflect on something, and you need some time, first of all, to look at the numbers, and then some time to sort of sit on that decision, then you can use your luteal phase for that good and analytical background. And then you can use your bleed, which is a really good time for inner reflection and looking at things. You can then think it through and really feel how you feel about it, and make that decision after a few days of bleeding, which is when most women make really good long-term decisions. So if you start charting your cycle, you'll start seeing when these peaks and troughs happen for different aspects of your life, and you can start looking in advance and thinking, okay, I know I'm better at my new ideas, my creativity in my early follicular phase. Some people, whilst they're even menstruating, they come out with so many new ideas, and that's the time they start journaling, because they know that that's when they come up with their better ideas. Some people, if they run their own businesses, they make sure they've always got their launch leading up to ovulation, because they know that they will do their best sales pitches at that time. Other women will know that if they've got some serious work to do, such as their tax returns or anything like that, they know that they're going to be better at doing that in their luteal phase, so they start planning it then. So once you know your cycle, you can really start honing down on when the best time is to start doing things and looking ahead, so you're not booking yourself full when you're menstruating. And the other great thing is you can then start communicating this to your friends and family and to your partner. So you start charting your cycle. You can start seeing peaks and troughs in your libido too. So you can then start communicating this to your partner and say, you know what, at this time of the month, I realize that I don't like anyone touching me, including you. If you communicate this to them in advance, they're not going to be upset or as upset because they don't feel that you're rejecting them when they're making advances towards you. If you know that at certain times you're always going to feel like that. Equally, if you know when your peaks are going to be, you can let them know so that they know to be home and make the most of it rather than going out with their friends. And unfortunately, this is something that you often see in reverse as well. So a woman goes through her sensitive phase because she's due to bleed or just been bleeding and she doesn't want to be touched, or she wants reduced touch and she's rejected her partner. So the partner then thinks, well, they're not interested in me, I'm going out with my friends. And then they miss the point where the libido starts to build again. If you have that communication back and forth, this can be really, really valuable. And you can make much more of your time together in a more positive way. And finally, I've put here building your network of support and red tent. So one thing that I think is really important when you're having your period, usually you have absolutely no energy or very little energy to do anything. And these days we all have our period at different times. So what we can do to help support one another, and this will help ourselves as well, is if you're open enough to chat to your friends and find out when they're bleeding, find out how you can help them when they're bleeding and ask them to help you when you're bleeding as well. So if you have children, on day one, you probably aren't going to be up for making dinner and ferrying them around. But if they've got friends that have the same after school activities, you could always ask for that friend to take them on that day, and then you return the favour. I always tell women as well, just before their bleed, to get everything that they can sorted just before, so that they're not having to think, I'm exhausted, but I need to do food shopping, or I've run out of toilet roll. You can start thinking about how you can communicate with your friends. And Alexandra Pope, who wrote a really good book, The Pill, Are You Sure It's For You? And she's also got a program called Red School. She talks about friends marking in their bleed days in each other's diaries, so they don't have to say anything, but their friends know to ask at that particular point in time, is there anything I can do for you? Is there anything I can help you with? And it might be that you need, as I said, toilet roll, or someone could drop you off an extra portion of food that they're cooking, and you can then reciprocate as well. So I've actually gone through that a lot faster than I intended to. So we're coming up to the end, so I've got more time for questions. Normally I the other way around and I talk too much and then there's no time for questions. So that's surmising it. If you don't have the cycle chart that I've sent out to people who have subscribed to my list, I check the names off afterwards and I'll get that sent out to you, so you can start doing the basic charting just so you can understand your cycle, and you can start reading in advance what you're doing, what your cycle is doing and how it affects you, and you can start planning things to really optimize and get the most out of that cycle. So I'm just going to wait for a minute to see if there are any questions coming in. And it seems that the connection hasn't dropped much in the last few minutes, so that's always good. One other thing as well that I didn't put on the slides that I find fascinating is during ovulation and the lead up to ovulation, our faces become more symmetrical, and apparently we wear more red. So that's another way we change our appearance. I have no idea how our faces change due to hormones, but they do. So are there any questions coming in at all? I'm just going to take a sip of water. Okay, I do apologize for the dropping connection. I don't know why that's happening. So no questions, but I'm definitely going to plan my exercise more. Totally feel like swimming in the first half. Didn't realize about protein in the last half. Okay, that's a really good point. Something else about exercise as well. If you feel more aggressive during your luteal phase, you can do an exercise such as go and use a punching bag or boxing during that phase to help do that. What effect does progesterone have on our bodies? Has quite a lot of effects. I don't know which one you want me to talk about in particular. So on our reproductive system, progesterone helps mature the womb lining and keep it in place. It also helps our arteries for our heart health. It also helps build more bones. It also helps with breast maturation. It's also essential for our thyroid health as well. So the thyroid progesterone loop is thyroid makes a hormone called pregnenolone. Pregnenolone makes progesterone, and progesterone is needed in in its optimal quantities for thyroid health. If you want to be more specific with your question on progesterone, I can be a bit more specific back. But it also seems to increase the talk between the left and the right hemispheres of our brains as well, according to Dr. Christian Northrup. So that's what increases the sort of analytical and intuitive abilities. And it's also what makes us feel a bit more introverted. Are there any other questions, or if you want to just clarify what it was you're asking on progesterone, please go ahead. Okay, that's enough. I could probably talk for several hours just on progesterone, so I try and just list off the bullet points on why it's important. So I'm going to just hold on for another few minutes to see if there are any other questions. You should have in your inbox, but I'll send it out to everyone who's on this webinar anyway, the charting your cycle at a high level, just so that you can start working on it. And I highly recommend using a journal as well for at least the first 3 cycles, even if not every day, and just sort of dumping everything that you feel. And I know journaling feels really strange at first if you're not used to doing it. I'm still getting into the habit, but after you've written for about 2 or 3 minutes, you'll find that it starts to flow, and you start writing things that you weren't aware of consciously, and more will come out. So it's really, really beneficial. And then what you can do is you can sort of highlight the top 2 or 3 words for that day and then write them in your chart. So I'll make sure that chart gets sent out to you. If there's any other questions. And then also I'm going to be doing a how to chart your cycle series again. I did one in the autumn, and I'm going to be doing that again in the spring. And you can chart your cycle to achieve or avoid pregnancy, but I also love looking at it for how you can look at your health and really analyze what's going on in your body. And it's so empowering when you can see what's going on. So I've got another comment here regarding food. The day or 2 days before my moon time, I crave savoury and carbs. I know we need the bit of extra energy for our bleed, but I just wonder if there's some kind of natural hormonal thinking in. So the really interesting thing about cravings is that the carbs and the savoury, I'm told, is nitrogen deficiency causing that kind of craving. And it can be that you're trying to get more energy for your bleed. But I'm told it's nitrogen. I can't remember which foods are rich in nitrogen. I want to say seeds and greens, but I'll look it up and I'll post that in the Facebook group. And I have to say as well, when you're craving certain foods, a lot of it's down to your microbiome. So that's all the genes and the bacteria in your gut. So when you have a craving for ice cream or something like that because you feel that you're going to die if you're not going to have ice cream, it's actually the bacteria in your gut that like sugary stuff telling your brain that that's what you really, really, really need. Otherwise, they're going to die off. So it's really fascinating looking at different cravings. But I know that savoury, especially bready things and potatoey things, tend to be a nitrogen craving. I'll put that in the Facebook group. I need to look it up. Any other questions at all? So I'm going to apologise once more for the... Oh, great. Yeah, just check cauliflower and spinach. So yeah, all the cruciferous veggies are rich in nitrogen. I should remember that, actually. I'll make a note in the Facebook group when I look up nitrogen cravings. My website address, if anyone wants it, is thehealthywomb.com. I also have a YouTube channel called WombTube, which you can subscribe to and you'll automatically see my videos. And oh, thank you, Melanie. I was about to say, I also do a joint podcast with Melanie about all things womb related. She's got them on her podcast channel, which is The Sacred Womb, and it's called Womb Wisdom. So we've got an episode up on sanitary products and how they can affect your period. So that's where you can find me. There's also the Healthy Womb Facebook group if you want to join me there. And I will be sending out information on my next... Thank you, Melanie. She put in all the links. This is brilliant. I'll be sending out information on the next Charting for Women's Health series. It's the same way you chart for either avoiding or achieving pregnancy. I just don't go over the rules, but I will send them out to people for that. So if there's no other questions, I'm going to leave it there. Oh, Melanie, you're bringing a brilliant assistant. I can see all these links popping up. If there's no other questions, I'm going to leave it there. You can ask more questions in the Facebook group after you've watched the replay. So it's been